Alison, I think we're good to go. Yeah.
Okay, super. Thanks, Matthias. Hi, welcome everyone. We're delighted to welcome you to this CFS side event. And we're very grateful to the CFS for allowing us to hold this side event called Bridging Agroecology and Biodiversity Action, Coalition Evidence and Policy Frameworks. My name is Alison Blais-Palmer, and I'm the UNESCO Chair on Food, Biodiversity, and Sustainability Studies. And before we begin, there's a few interpretation is available in Spanish and French. I'm going to remind the speakers, if they can remember, to please speak slowly to enable the translation. We also invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you're in the audience, we would like you to share with everyone that you're here, so that would be great. And to let you know how we envision this event, this side event, shaping up, we're going to start off with some remarks by 5 distinguished panelists, and then followed question and answer session. Throughout the side event, we're going to be polling you to understand more about a few items related to agroecology and biodiversity. The first question that we're going to be asking you, that's going to pop up on your screen in a minute or two, is looking at the connections that you see between agroecology and biodiversity. Further on in the session, the side event, we're going to ask you about what happens to create synergies between agroecology and agricultural and other biodiversities. And then finally, we're going to ask you to help us gauge what you think are the synergies and opportunities that bring together the 3 Rio conventions with the CFS. So we're going to start with the first poll now. The question that we're asking you as participants is, do you connect with agrobiodiversity and or agroecology? And you have 7 options to choose from. First is that you connect always with both. Secondly is you always connect with agroecology. Third is always connecting with agrobiodiversity. The 4th option is a bit with both. The 5th one is a bit with agroecology, and the 6th is a bit with agrobiodiversity. And the final one is not with either of them. While you're filling out the poll, I'd just like to thank our co-organizers. First of all, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, of Economic Affairs, Education and Research, Food Policy Forum for Change, the Alliance of Bioversity-CIAT, also the Agroecology Fund, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, the UNESCO Chair on Biodiversity, Food Biodiversity and Sustainability Studies, the Laurier Center for Sustainable Food Systems, Food. So hopefully the form is being filled out now. We should get some answers to the poll in a minute or two. As you can see, there's many people in attendance who are either always engaging with issues around agrobiodiversity and agroecology, which is great, and more as well who are engaged in a less engaged way, but still have it on their radar screen. So this is really wonderful for us to know going forward, because we know that we'll be getting some really good questions from you for our panelists. So we look forward to moving to the next part of our side event. And I would like to welcome you and introduce the side event so that we have a sort of a framing idea of where we're going. As we all know, this is a landmark year with the negotiations of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity. There are growing commitments to address land degradation, and the CFS Policy Recommendations on Agroecological and other innovative approaches. This side event will discuss common strategies to advance these frameworks through synergies and collaborative action, evidence mobilization, enabling policies, and increased resources for food systems transformation. So what we're really interested in here is how can we bring together agro and other biodiversity into the conversations around food security with the CFS, and vice versa. How can we cross those 2 organizational foci and move the ball forward so that we can address many of the problems that those 2 issues help us think about. In the past, we have seen how international agreements can be platforms for change as local communities and countries have the basis for action through international frameworks. These frameworks can set up the pathways for action and support communities, not just in policy, but also in practice. Agricultural biodiversity is already central to agroecology. Without agricultural biodiversity, there is no agroecology. And agroecology can be a lever to bring policy coherence across biodiversity, desertification, and climate agendas. This is especially exciting when we think about the synergies we can achieve through building more nutritional food systems and human rights grounded in the protection of agricultural and other biodiversities. At the special CFS Secretariat session, they will be asking how the 3 Rio Convention bodies will respond to the need to transform food systems for food security and nutrition, and their respective relevance to CFS and its various policy products. As we move towards 2022 and the Rio Summit anniversary, we see our side event related to these conversations, focusing more exclusively on agroecology, including human rights and agrobiodiversity. Now, we're interested to hear from you about how states and your organizations can act to make this happen. And we will begin the panel session with a presentation or an intervention by Anne-Laure Roy from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food from France. And prior to beginning this session, this side event, we put a few guiding questions to our panelists, and I'd like to share those with you now. Perhaps if, Anne-Laure, if you haven't had a chance to, Anne-Laure, sorry, if you haven't had a chance to think about them yet, it's something that we could get into in the discussion, in the Q&A. But we're interested to hear from you about how states can bridge action on agroecology and biodiversity. And we're also hoping you can introduce us to the actions and coalition that France is involved in to promote these topics. So Anne-Laure, the floor is yours, please.
Merci beaucoup. J'espère que la traduction fonctionne. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Je vous entends, mais oui, ça va. Je crois que
Ok, merci beaucoup, parce que j'ai choisi de m'exprimer en français. Merci beaucoup aux organisateurs de donner cette opportunité au ministère de l'Agriculture français d'expliquer comment la France s'engage dans l'agroécologie et comment est-ce que la France voit le lien en fait entre l'agroécologie, la biodiversité, les changements climatiques, etc. Donc, d'un point de vue agronomique et écologique, bien sûr, le lien entre l'agroécologie et l'amélioration de la biodiversité n'est plus à démontrer, qu'on utilise moins d'intrants ou qu'on utilise des intrants organiques, qu'on respecte et qu'on améliore les sols, le fait qu'on fasse de la rotation et qu'on diversifie les cultures, tout cela participe à la complexification des écosystèmes cultivés, et mécaniquement, la biodiversité agricole et la biodiversité des sols sont bien sûr améliorées, aussi bien du point de vue des espèces animales et en particulier des pollinisateurs, mais aussi pour les espèces végétales. Pour mieux faire connaître et comprendre ces éléments-là, la France a été à l'initiative d'une motion auprès de l'Union internationale pour la conservation de la nature. Cette motion s'appelle « Développer les pratiques agroécologiques comme solution fondée sur la nature », qui a été largement soutenue puisque 98% des suffrages exprimés lors du congrès de l'UICN ont été favorables à cette motion. Plus récemment, dans le sommet Le représentant du Mexique nous parlera plus largement de cette coalition, donc je n'entrerai pas dans le détail. Pour la France, la valeur ajoutée de l'agroécologie est qu'elle permet de répondre de manière simultanée à l'ensemble des défis et des enjeux auxquels les agricultures dans le monde entier sont confrontées. Je parle du défi climatique, également du défi de la sécurité alimentaire, le défi de la baisse de la biodiversité, le défi de la fertilité des sols, le défi d'offrir à des consommateurs des produits d'une qualité sanitaire irréprochable, de répondre également aux attentes sociétales, et enfin le défi de permettre aux agriculteurs de vivre dignement de leur métier en étant rémunérés de façon juste. Donc, l'agroécologie permet ainsi d'apporter une cohérence politique entre les agendas de la biodiversité, de la désertification et du climat. Pour commencer par la biodiversité, la France n'est pas seule à penser qu'il faut faire ce lien. Ainsi, en préparation de la COP15 sur la biodiversité, dans les négociations en cours du cadre de la biodiversité post-2020, la tendance est que de plus en plus de pays demandent à ce que l'agroécologie soit reconnue comme une pratique qui permet de conserver et d'augmenter la biodiversité et qu'elle apparaisse dans la partie agricole de ce nouveau cadre. Si on parle de la lutte contre la désertification, on peut parler de l'accélérateur de la Grande Muraille Verte, qui est porté par 11 pays du Sahel et que la France soutient également. Ça nous paraît un bon exemple, puisque l'objectif de la Grande Muraille Verte n'est pas seulement de planter des arbres à la lisière du désert dans les 11 pays concernés, mais c'est une approche de restauration plus globale des agroécosystèmes à une large échelle sur toute cette bande sahélienne. Et par exemple, dans les 5 dernières années, cette initiative a permis d'agir dans plus de 500 communautés, de restaurer plus de 50 000 hectares de terres dégradées, de renforcer le stockage du carbone dans les sols, d'ainsi en augmenter la productivité, de diversifier les espèces plantées en mettant en place des couvertures végétales sur plusieurs niveaux, en promouvant donc l'agroforesterie, et ainsi en contribuant à la production d'aliments durables et à l'augmentation des revenus des petits producteurs de ces régions défavorisées. Donc, par la diffusion d'approches agroécologiques, la Grande Muraille Verte est un bon exemple de comment les populations peuvent accéder à des chaînes de valeur locales qui améliorent leur sécurité alimentaire et leur nutrition, tout en développant des opportunités économiques et en particulier pour les femmes et les jeunes. Concernant la lutte contre le changement climatique, nous avons déjà évoqué l'effet bénéfique des pratiques agroécologiques sur le stockage du carbone dans les sols et l'amélioration qui s'ensuit de la diversité des invertébrés et des autres micro-organismes du sol qui participent ainsi à la bonne santé des sols. Et les sols retiennent également mieux l'eau, qui est un point très important également. Et donc, dans cette idée-là, la France a lancé et continue de soutenir pleinement l'initiative 4 pour 1000, qui s'appelle donc des sols pour la sécurité alimentaire et le climat. Un autre exemple sur le climat, dans le cadre de la préparation de la COP26, la France soutient l'initiative de la Grande-Bretagne et d'une vingtaine d'autres États pour l'initiative FACT, Forest, Agriculture and Commodity Trade, qui cherche à lutter contre la déforestation importée. Enfin, la France se mobilise pour des investissements plus responsables qui intègrent à la fois les enjeux climatiques et ceux de la biodiversité. Ainsi, au cours du One Planet Summit qui a été organisé à Paris en janvier dernier, l'Agence française de développement, avec 30 autres banques nationales, régionales ou multilatérales de développement, se sont engagées collectivement pour modifier leur stratégie et leur politique d'investissement, ainsi que leur mode opératoire, pour contribuer à la réorientation des flux financiers pour un développement résilient et sobre en carbone. C'est la coalition qui s'appelle Coalition sur l'alignement avec l'accord de Paris des banques de développement. L'Agence française de développement travaille également avec la FAO pour mettre en place des indicateurs qui permettront de conditionner les financements à des actions en faveur de la biodiversité. Pour terminer, juste pour citer 3 coalitions qui ont également émergé au moment du One Planet Summit et qui sont en lien avec l'agroécologie, comment est-ce qu'on la lie avec la biodiversité, le climat, etc. On peut citer l'Alliance pour la préservation des forêts tropicales et humides, ainsi que l'Alliance pour l'investissement dans le capital naturel et enfin la coalition One Planet des entreprises pour la biodiversité. Merci beaucoup, je reste à votre disposition pour des éléments complémentaires.
Merci beaucoup, Anne-Laure. Thank you very much for such a wonderful intervention. I would like to remind speakers, ask the speakers to slow down. I know I get really excited when I'm speaking, and it's hard to speak slowly, especially when we have so many things we want to share with everybody. So thanks, Anne-Laure, for that. I now invite Miguel Jorge Garcia-Wander, who is the permanent representative of Mexico to UN agencies in Rome, to take the floor. You have 5 minutes, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Blake Palmer. I think you're going to have two challenges. One is going to translate my Spanglish, and then the second, my speed, because I get excited. Allow me to start by thanking the organizers for this side event and for their invitation to participate in this conversation of a topic that, in my view, has acquired more relevance. We recognize the importance of transforming the current way that food systems operate and the need to direct this transformation toward the construction of systems that are more human, more healthy, more sustainable, and more productive. In this quest for answers, we have come to the realization of the urgent need that we have to reverse the damages that current food systems had caused to biodiversity, the natural resources, and to human health. Agroecology and indigenous people food systems offer realistic opportunity to address this impact. These approaches, agroecology and indigenous food people food systems, offer options centered in the human person and his rights, as well in the wellness of Mother Earth. You have asked me to address two questions for our intervention. One is what could be the role of governments, and the second is why we have joined the Agroecology Coalition. I will try to address both of them, and at the same time, share with you some of the transformations that are being implemented in Mexico under the leadership of President López Obrador. I believe that the main responsibility of a government lies in the provision of public goods, and that one of the most important public goods that a government can provide is the setting and implementation of proper public policies, which should be centered in the dignity of the human person and in the well-being of our planet. Congruent with this responsibility, our government has taken transcendental steps to set in motion a profound transformation of our food systems, with a comprehensive and holistic approach from production to plate. Some of the main policies established so far include setting of frontal labels in food and beverage products designed to inform consumers of the characteristics of the food they are acquiring and to discourage the consumption of empty calories and the ultra-processed food, particularly by children. Second, to reduce the use of pesticides. We have set the goal of eliminating the use of glyphosate by 2024. The prohibition of GMO corn for planting. The strengthening of nutritional programs for the first 1,000 days of life in children and the promotion of maternal lactation. The transformation of our agricultural systems toward more agroecological practices and the production of bio inputs and local seed banks and markets. The planting of 1 million hectares by 2024 with forest and fruit trees. The establishment of a minimum guarantee price for 5 food commodities deemed essential in Mexican diet. And the strengthening of the system of rural stores and milk distribution centers known as Segalmex, which with more than 30,000 selling points brings food to those who are in more need across the country, not only in urban areas, but particularly in rural areas. While these policies are designed to address the main challenges of malnutrition, environmental degradation, and the loss of biodiversity and natural resources, They are also designed to produce a greater variety of healthier foods and to develop local and regional markets, increasing the possibility for consumers in rural and marginal areas to have better and more access to nutritious foods at a reasonable prices. We also believe that we must continue to work internationally to create synergies and look for the implementation of nature-based solutions with an ecosystem-based approach, emphasizing on improving risk management, enhancing information flow, and promote the creation of synergies among the three or Rio conventions. We have identified that nature-based solutions with an ecosystem-based approach can provide a cost-effective solution for those challenges. We believe that the agroecology and indigenous people food systems coalitions offer a realistic and proven alternative to achieve these goals. Both are centered in people and planet, and both have a deep understanding of the importance of preserving biodiversity. I would like also to highlight the importance of having adequate financing and increased investment to address the challenges and for the successful operation of these coalitions. We recognize that public investment can only partially cover the needed resources. Therefore, we must encourage private sector participation in this process. Mexico is willing to collaborate in this coalition and in any other coalition the well-being of our producers and societies. I am sure there is a plethora of ideas and views among the participants in this event that can be shared and analyzed in this coalition. We must take advantage of the momentum and move into action. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for that really inspirational presentation. And I realize that you need to leave us. So what we will ask our participants to do is if they have any questions for you, to put them in the question box and we will get them to you and you will have a chance to think about them. But we're very grateful. Thank you very much. I was really inspired by your comment about the provision of the government's responsibility to provide public goods through policy that focuses on the dignity of people and well-being of the planet. And I think everything that you've described really reflects that. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We're now going to go to our second Zoom poll, and that is going to be focused on what we need to do to create more synergies between agrobiodiversity and agroecology. So if we could put up the second Zoom poll, we have a few options available to you. You can select stronger networks, more evidence, enabling policies, more resources, or other. So if you would like to go ahead and tell us what you think, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. The other thing that you may want to be doing right now is if you have any questions that come to mind, is you could...
Lo que pueden hacer en este momento es que si tienen otras preguntas, pueden hacerlas en el...
If you have any questions that you would like to sort of bookmark for us, you can certainly start to put those in the question box. And we will get to those in about 20 minutes time. So if you have a chance to give us an answer to our second poll question, that would be
Si tiene
lovely.
oportunidad de darnos una respuesta a nuestra segunda encuesta, aquí las vamos a compartir.
Okay, it seems as if the poll has closed, and these are the results that we have. So 54% of people indicated that enabling policies are tantamount to achieving links between agrobiodiversity and other agri and other biodiversities, as well as agroecology. And I think that the examples that we've had so far, both from France and Mexico, really speak to that. The next choice was stronger networks. So connecting people together through knowledge mobilization and building networks amongst practitioners and also countries so that they can share good practices. And then also more resources. So as we heard from both France and Mexico, there are initiatives in both countries to provide support for these kinds of actions on the ground. And I think what we've also heard so far is that it's the action on the ground that's really so important to making these goals into a reality. So thank you very much for letting us know what you think about that question. What we're going to do now is turn our attention to Magdalena Ackerman from the Society for International Development and Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism. Magdalena, we have a little bit of wiggle room, so if you'd like to take a bit more than 5 minutes, we would welcome your intervention. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your contribution.
Great, thank you so much, Alison, and great that I have a bit more time to speak also more slowly. Yeah, and as you were saying, I am speaking on behalf of the Civil Society and Indigenous Mechanism, where I would say the beating heart of agroecology is, right? Where social movements of food producers have been coming collectively to engage within the Committee on World Food Security. So having said this, I would start by mentioning that agroecology is not only meant to apply ecological principles in agricultural practices to address climate change or biodiversity loss. Agroecology goes much beyond. Agroecology aims at a systemic transformation of food systems. And this was very well highlighted by the HLP report on agroecological and other innovative approaches. And this systemic transformation through agroecology actually emerges from the role and agency of food producers and consumers. So this is why I was mentioning the beating heart of agroecology at the very beginning. This role and agency of food producers make that agroecology is not only a practice. We're not only talking about an agricultural practice. We're talking also about a movement and a science and knowledge. Because food producers are the true holders of the knowledge of agroecology. And through agroecology, producers regain autonomy and control over their food production. And this is extremely important because through agroecology, they are able to decide the what, the how, the when to produce and consume food through social equity and also in full respect of our planet. And mentioning our planet, I would like to call it our common home, right? That hosts us every day. And agroecology fully recognizes this. And this is why every practice that goes through agroecology respects, safeguards, and protects our common home. But having this in consideration, agroecology also at its core has a social organization and structure that implies a power shift from corporations to those who actually produce the food. And this has several implications. This means that access and control on resources for food producers is fundamental for agroecology. Producers, as I said before, are also the holders of knowledge. So producers' organizations then become the main vehicle for disseminating and uptaking agroecology. So this necessarily implies that we need to also rethink how methodologies of training and learning are established. We need to go towards a more horizontal way or methodology of trainings and learnings to really disseminate agroecology and uptake agroecology. I would give the example of Farmers to Farmers School, which are a very good example of this horizontal knowledge transmission. As I was saying before, through agroecology, producers regain autonomy and control over their food production. And this is exemplified, for instance, through the elimination of their dependence on the use of agrochemicals. Also, through agroecology, they gain more independence from global markets through opting and preferring local and short circuits of food, such as local markets or, for instance, community-supported agriculture initiatives, which actually reduce or make more direct the link between producers and consumers. Talking about this autonomy from a feminist perspective, this is fundamental because women producers through agroecology strengthen their autonomy. So as you might be seeing, I'm talking about several aspects that are both, let's say, causes and consequences of agroecology that are fully embedded in the entire human rights framework. I was talking about women's rights. I was talking about rights of peasants and people working and living in rural areas. I was talking about the right to a healthy environment. I was talking about the right to water. And of course, centrally, the right to adequate food, because of course, agroecology provides fresh and seasonal food, which has a higher nutritional value. So if we talk about agroecology, we must talk about ensuring and protecting human rights. And having this understanding of this basis of agroecology, then any approach that aims to support agroecology needs to fully acknowledge all these basic pillars and all these aspects of agroecology. They need to take them into account. So any approach that tries to redefine agroecology or puts maybe agroecology in an amalgamation with other practices that might or too often are detrimental to agroecology, those approaches in reality won't support agroecology. So by recognizing this basis of agroecology, then we can start paving the way to approaches that will truly support agroecology. And this paving the way actually is only possible if there's an inclusive participation of civil society in the decision-making of this paving the way. And this should be ensured from the very beginning, from the origin of any approach that aims to support agroecology. Those who feed the world need to be at the origin of such decision-making, so they can actually transmit their knowledge, their agency, and also transmit what are their actual needs to make possible the continuation and the support for agroecology, and thus ultimately ensure the food system transformation that is so urgently needed. And on this aspect of and the necessity, of truly inclusive decision-making for any approach, there are some aspects that we need to take into account also. Any process to establish an approach to support agroecology needs to also recognize the existing power imbalances, and therefore ensure strong safeguards against conflicts of interest and also go beyond some current economic interests that too often promote the status quo of unsustainable food systems. And I will just finish saying one last thing on this paving the way for approaches to support agroecology, is that any approach that does not put food producers and agroecological practitioners at the driving seat, at the origin of any approach, meaning deciding the rules of engagement, the scope, purpose, and methodology for participation, and also the common vision, will actually inevitably result in a top-down initiative, which is contradictory to the whole purpose of agroecology. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was very much appreciated. And I'd like to now invite Fergus Sinclair from the Center for International Forest Research and World Agroforestry. You have 6 minutes, please, and I will give you a 1 minute signal, if that's okay.
Yeah, super. So I want to start by telling you I'm coming from as a co-convener of the Transformative Partnership Platform on Agroecological Transitions, the TPP. Transformative obviously is about change, and we've seen that a lot of the solution space, particularly, for example, in UNFSS, was really just about making business as usual agriculture a little bit more efficient, which obviously won't tackle a transformative agenda. You need really big changes to consumption patterns as well as production. And partnership, because being inclusive, as we've just heard, and being coherent across the various institutions, people, organizations that are working towards agroecological transitions is really important if things are going to be effective. And then a platform, because the critical issue now is action. And the TPP is addressing knowledge and implementation gaps that are constraining agroecological transitions. And it works in 8 domains where those have been identified. Now, linking agrobiodiversity and agroecology is very straightforward, because if we go to the HLPE report on agroecological and other innovative approaches, and I think Magdalena is absolutely right that we need to be very careful about distinguishing agroecology, and within that report there were 13 principles which were set out. And if all those principles are applied, then it's clear that you are dealing with agroecology. If you start only looking at some of them, maybe the ecological ones and not the equity ones, then there's a potential for not fulfilling a full agroecological approach. So the principles are then really important. And one of those principles is biodiversity. And that's biodiversity both being used in agricultural production, the agrobiodiversity, but also methods of agricultural production that are in harmony with nature, so that the impact on biodiversity as a whole, on the environment, is controlled. And clearly that's around the agroecosystem management aspects of agroecology. So there are other principles of recycling and input reduction that are very much connected to the functional diversity of agricultural production. And where you've got plants and animals that are different in the way in which they utilize the environment, then you can get higher net primary productivity with low or in fact regenerative environmental impact. And of course, synergy, the concept of managing interactions, becomes vital in terms of being able to manage those aspects. But actually realizing biodiversity is as much to do with the social, economic, and governance issues in agroecology. So economic diversification is often based on biodiversity because you need to have a number of different things in your farming system if you're going to be producing different economic products from the same space. And then in terms of governance, whether people who are the custodians of genetic resources, of genetic improvement, who's choosing what plants and seeds are available and how they are grown becomes absolutely vital. So responsible governance is absolutely critical of both land and genetic resources. And critical to this is agency. And it is the agency not only of producers, but also of consumers and people along the food system, processors, transporters. The whole system needs to operate in a way in which people have the agencies to express a preference for the way in which the food that they eat is produced, and whether it's equitable, whether it's environmentally sustainable. And what I think is really significant over the last few weeks is that the CFS HLPE report on agroecology, the policy convergence happened, and the coalition that came through UNFSS, partly I think because civil society, a lot of civil society organizations boycotted UNFSS because it appeared to be operating in a very top-down fashion. And the pressure then from a lot of member states that wanted agroecology on the agenda finally got in the pre-summit a session on agroecology in the plenary, and then the development of this coalition. And in the background, the expert panel on food had put up this call for agroecological principles, the 13 HLP principles, to be taken on board by UNFSS. Now, that didn't happen, but it's absolutely clear that that pressure turned the tables, so that probably the strongest outcome from UNFSS is a coalition on transforming food systems through agroecology that has four key elements. It's implementing the CFS recommendations and going beyond those recommendations in many cases, reconfiguring research and development so that you've got co-creation of knowledge, not a top-down approach, but working with local producers in order to develop locally adapted innovation. So supporting local innovation rather than pushing silver bullets that come from outside. And then there's the need for the integrated policy. And there was a great event in mid-July where agroecologically conducive policies were analysed, and there's a paper coming out on that that's currently under open consultation. And that's critically integration of policy across sectors, energy, agriculture, forestry, environment, trade, all need to be working together if agroecology is going to be enabled, and across scales. And there are key scales, particularly the local territorial scale, where there's very rarely either policy instruments or social capital to be able to manage multiple ecosystem services. So that local landscape scale becomes critical, and creating structures at that scale important. And the final element is private sector engagement and ensuring that is done in a responsible and clear way. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great intervention. Fergus, we're very glad to have heard from you. And we invite now Miriam Medell, apologies, from the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. You have 5 minutes, please, Miriam.
Thank you very much. And it is really a pleasure for me to be here with all of you. I represent the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, which is, I mean, it is probably the least known of the Rio Conventions, but together with the Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity, we form this group of multilateral agreements that look at the environment, but also look at ways and try to provide a blueprint for sustainable development. We were the UNCCD, whose mandate is to support member states in the fight against desertification, land degradation, and drought, was honored to be the anchor agency, the UN anchor agency for Action Track 3 of the Food Systems Summit, where the Agroecology Coalition emerged. We're very excited to see that up to date, the coalition has galvanized the support of over 55 member countries, UN and regional development organizations, regional and national farmers organizations, and research organizations. How does this relate to our work? Well, for us, the pure creation, the mere creation, and really the momentum gained by the coalition reflects the recognition that the greatest prospects for reversing biodiversity loss, and especially the loss of agrobiodiversity, lies in transforming how we produce, distribute, and consume food. So agroecology offers a key step in enabling all types of food systems to work for people and to work for nature. How? Well, by providing strategies and practices that can sustainably intensify production. We need that because we have 7 billion people to feed around the world. These strategies can also reverse land degradation and reduce the pressure to expand the agriculture's footprint further into natural ecosystems. This is important for halting the loss of wild biodiversity and agrobiodiversity, but also is important because it mitigates human and wildlife conflict and the emergence of zoonotic diseases, as some studies have already shown. Agroecology strategies and practices also can deliver more equitable food security and nutrition. And what we say at UNCCD is, by working with and not against nature, agroecology can enhance biodiversity and natural processes and restore and protect the ecosystem services that support agricultural productivity. This also provides a strategy to help build climate resilient agricultural systems by helping farmers adapt to changing weather patterns and by mitigating the effects of drought and further global climate change. So this will not only provide the food, as I was saying earlier, for today's global population, but also protect biodiversity and the genetical material needed to deliver food and nutrition security for future generations. We are the guardian of one of the SDG indicators, 15.3, which is land degradation neutrality. And land degradation neutrality means that the amount of land that we are inevitably utilizing and degrading for human consumption, not only of food, but for other resources, that amount of land will be equal or hopefully less than the land that we are restoring and rehabilitating. So we have our parties have committed voluntarily to some land degradation neutrality targets. We have over 120 countries that have committed to that. And what we see is that between 62 and 83% of these actions are focused on sustainable soil, cropland management, and biodiversity and erosion control. So really, agrobiodiversity is one very, very clear strategy to advance multiple SDGs. It is about the land. It is also about the biodiversity. It's about the climate. It's about food security. It's about migration. It's about what can you argue about peace and prosperity. So thank you very much. I remain here for further questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Miriam. That was a perfect end to our panel discussion. You really wrapped things up nicely for us, so I appreciate that. Because we have a short amount of time, just given the length of the side event, what I'm going to do is put a question specifically to each one of you that seems to be relevant, and then I'm going to ask you for 1 minute closing thoughts as we approach 2 o'clock, so that we have time for closing remarks. And with that in mind, I'm just going to go to a question that actually is directed specifically to someone, and that is to you, Fergus. Francisco Rosado Mai says, thank you for mentioning great points. I'd like to hear about the definition of co-creation of knowledge. This is one concept that the Indigenous peoples have been fighting for. And sorry if I not use the word fighting appropriately. I actually was a keystone concept for the cluster solution presented in many action tracks from Indigenous peoples. So Fergus, if you could address that, would be really great. And I'm going to have to limit you to about 2 minutes, if that's okay.
Just stop me if I'm going on too long.
Will do. Okay.
So yeah, I think this is a really significant issue, because just like greenwashing, talking about co-creation could be more or less serious. And I think it's useful for us to distinguish between different terms here, because Indigenous knowledge is used quite a lot. And in general, Indigenous knowledge means knowledge which is culturally contextual. But actually what people mean a lot of the time is knowledge of Indigenous people. So that is, we've defined people as being a group, and it is their knowledge, and it's often traditional knowledge, it's often been handed down. Now, often local knowledge is also very contemporary. So, the world is changing, and farmers and people are observing what is happening and are innovating and are creating new knowledge. And that can be, if it's being done by Indigenous people, then we refer it to as Indigenous. Now, the critical issue here is power relationships, and that is we often end up with a situation where there is a power imbalance and there's established science, which has quite often a greater reach, and in some contexts has got a much more power in terms of where resources are going. And being able to recognize that the different knowledge systems are important, and being able to cross-translate between them and to genuinely co-create. And that means not having a power imbalance, but actually allowing people to choose what new knowledge they want to bring into their systems, and to be able to do so without having to take things that they don't want. So I think transdisciplinary science, in which stakeholders and their knowledge are given equal treatment in the process of creating knowledge, which is problem focused and solution orientated, is very much at the heart of agroecology, and that's the way forward. So yeah, thanks. I can see I should shut up.
That's okay. Thank you. You have so many important things to share with us, but we want to hear from other people as well. There's a specific question for the CSM. So Magdalena, if you could perhaps take this one, that would be great. And it builds very much on the previous question about empowering and providing agency to different actors in the food system. Specifically, this is from Stephanie Piers, re-empowering the food producers is clearly a key element for food systems transformation, but it is clearly not enough. So do you see a role within civil society for example, other actors, maybe along the food chain, as well as what Stephanie is asking about, specifically consumers? Thanks, Magdalena.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you for the question. As I was saying, I think during my intervention, agroecology is centrally an issue of human rights, no? So autonomy of producers, empowerment of food producers, but also consumers, as Fergus was clearly presenting at the beginning of his intervention, is an issue of ensuring and protecting the rights of those who produce the food, but also who consume the food, and to really ensure that they are agents, no, of producing and consuming, to choose what they consume according also to the environment they live within. And having said this, I think this is important because, of course, food producers that have been putting in practice agroecology and have been producing agroecology, but also consumers. I think the community-supported agriculture initiatives are a great example of agroecological pathways that connect consumers and producers. They have been doing so for centuries now, no? Now what we are voicing is that support is needed by public policies and approaches to ensure that these rights are fulfilled, that, for instance, the right to land, the right to water are ensured for those who produce the food. And this is central also, connecting it a bit to the issues of the coalitions that other speakers were talking about, because I think the main point here is that we are evaluating as CSM the outcomes of the Food System Summit. I think Fergus has already mentioned that we as CSM, together with other 500 organizations, have been contesting the Food System Summit. We have launched a political declaration which has more than 1,000 signatures now. In light of the outcomes, including the coalitions, we are evaluating this, but I think the concerns remain. The coalitions emerge without us, so this is fundamental, without the agency of food producers. And many other concerns that have been expressed, but I can further develop after. Sorry for going, but I think this is connected to the question. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. And Lara, if you could respond to this next question, and that is, it's a question that you did touch on in your presentation, and that's the role of the Global North in agroecology and agrobiodiversity, the role of farmers in agroecology, both Global North and Global South, and what are the mechanisms to join up the two? So if you could speak to that in 2 minutes, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense déjà la première chose, il ne faut pas opposer le Nord et le Sud. Comme ça a été rappelé par tout le monde, on a une seule planète et l'agroécologie, en particulier avec les 13 principes qui sont dans le rapport du HLPE, qui sont la base de la coalition sur l'agroécologie dont on a parlé tout à l'heure, sont des principes et qui ont été rappelés aussi par Magdalena tout à l'heure dans leur entièreté. Tous ces principes, ainsi que les 10 éléments qui sont portés par la FAO, sont des principes universels. Donc, il n'y a pas de nord et de sud, et de toute façon, on est tous liés. Donc, par exemple, puisque je suis censée représenter le Nord, et puis je vais répondre à une question aussi sur l'agriculture biologique qui a été posée dans dans le fil des questions. Au niveau français et encore plus au niveau européen, les 27 États membres de l'Union européenne s'engagent dans une stratégie Farm to Fork, s'engagent à pousser l'agriculture biologique, qui est une des formes de l'agroécologie. Et donc, par exemple, on s'est fixé un objectif chiffré d'augmenter de 25% d'ici 2030 les exploitations agricoles qui seront reconnues en agriculture biologique. Dans cette même stratégie, on s'est donné un objectif de baisser de 20% l'utilisation des fertilisants organiques, de baisser de 50% l'utilisation des pesticides et de baisser également de 50% tous les antibiotiques. Donc c'était juste pour donner des exemples sur la façon dont nous, au Nord, on essaye de faire avancer les modèles de nos agricultures et comment on participe aux transformations des systèmes alimentaires. Mais c'est tous ensemble qu'on va y arriver. Donc, c'était juste pour donner des exemples de politiques appliquées au niveau européen, mais il y a beaucoup d'autres exemples qui ont déjà été donnés et en effet sur la plateforme TPP dont a parlé Fergus tout à l'heure, on pourra en trouver aussi beaucoup d'autres. La FAO avec l'outil TAPE est également en train de valoriser tout autour de la planète la façon dont l'agroécologie effectivement participe à l'amélioration et à la transformation globale des systèmes alimentaires. Et je pense qu'il faut vraiment continuer à travailler tous ensemble.
Merci beaucoup, Anne-Laure. C'est très intéressant. Now I'm going to put a question if Miriam is handy and is ready to respond. This is a bit of a question and a comment. It has a comment to start with, as many of these questions do. We all agree that human rights are central to both biodiversity and agroecology, but they are not being adequately addressed in either the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework or the CFS Agroecology policy processes. And the question is, how can we ensure that rights such as land tenure, which are obviously very linked to the quality of the land and desertification, how they can be placed at the center of both agroecology and biodiversity policies?
Thank you very much. And I really, really appreciate this question, Alison, and the person who asked it. In 2019, in our Conference of the Parties of the UNCCD, a landmark, a historic decision was adopted. And it was a decision on land tenure and on the importance of secure tenure rights as an enabler, as an important basic enabler for land degradation neutrality practices, for land rehabilitation, for land restoration. Now, this was, and the request was, it was the acknowledgement of this, and then the request for the UNCCD Secretariat to work together with FAO on how to implement the voluntary guidelines on land tenure into land degradation neutrality. We are doing that work now, and we are also inviting everyone. I mean, there will be, you will be hearing from us. There will be plenty of opportunities to engage on how to really incorporate these guidelines, how to create some very, very concrete proposals for governments to incorporate this issue of land tenure into their conversations around land degradation neutrality. Our COP is in May 2022 in Abidjan, and we hope to continue this conversation, which is really new. It was the first time that it was adopted in 2019. We hope to continue this conversation there and to have some more concrete proposals for member states. Two things here. One is participation of civil society. Yes, if we want to incorporate the whole body of human rights decisions into the body of environmental decisions, we need to have the two sides talk. And sometimes that is not obvious and that is not evident. So we really need civil society and different stakeholders to help us push talk to your national governments, talk to your national delegations, and also participate in the multilateral processes. And the other issue, the other thing that I would say is, let's try to have everyone at the table and discuss with everyone, because at least in the case of land tenure looks very different from which part of the world you're in. I think it was a huge accomplishment that it was recognized that secure tenure rights mean that people will take better care of the land and will be more prone to work towards rehabilitation. But it looks differently for different parts of the world. So we really need to talk to everyone. I mean, it has to be very, very inclusive. And I would very much encourage everyone who is here to raise their concerns, to share their ideas, and to come forward to the processes that are established. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. I would like now, as we draw towards the close of our side event, to invite our panelists, starting with Anne Lahr, to address what we're going to be asking in our final poll exercise with our audience. And that is to reflect on the synergies and opportunities that bring together the 3 Rio conventions and the CFS. And I can give you each just 2 minutes each. So please, and Laura, if you could get us started, that would be so great. Thank you.
Could you give me some more minutes to think about it and repeat the questions, please? I'm not completely...
Okay, Miriam is prepared to
yes,
go with
thank you, Miriam, to go
over to you,
first.
Miriam.
Actually, I am a little selfish because I also have to go very soon. But I do work a lot on synergies and what does the synergies mean and what is it that the Rio Conventions need to be synergistically applied. I mean, yes, we need to work together at the macro level, at the regime building level, but synergies are better, are more effective nationally. When it trickles down to national, regional, and local implementation. So we need to make sure that the NDCs, whatever is going to come out from the Post-2020 Biodiversity Framework, the land degradation neutrality goals, national adaptation plans, decisions taken in the context of FAO bodies, that all of that at the national level is coherent and synergistically applied. And I'm also talking about funds, because often governments, the one ministry doesn't talk to the other, and then they have different types of projects. It really needs to be, the conversation, that the synergy needs to be done pretty much at the national level. Little commercial, with the other 2 Rio Convention secretariats, we have launched now a campaign calling Restoring Balance with Nature, which speaks to how what you do, when you do a climate action, you have an impact in biodiversity law, a positive impact to protect biodiversity and to protect the land. When you work on land restoration, you're actually doing climate action because you restore carbon to the soil, etc. So please, I will leave our website in the chat box, and I invite everyone to take a look at that, and maybe that can inspire you to look about synergies as well.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and thanks for being with us. We know you have to leave us. Fergus, over to you. You have the second word, and it's going to have to be short because we don't have so much time.
I'd like to do 2 things. I think that there are big issues that have been brought up, and governance is one, governance of coalitions, and it's coming up in the chat all along. And I'd say to Magdalena, the Agroecology Coalition, how that is structured going forwards is entirely up to all of us. Yeah, it's an open-ended process. And inclusive governance is what is needed, and the structures and the way in which the coalition will be governed is something that needs to be decided. And the second critical issue, which Miriam was really pointing towards, is this missing middle that I mentioned. And it's not just the horizontal missing middle in terms of cross-sectoral coherence in terms of policy, but also cross-scale. And the fact that you've got UNCCD, CBD, and UNFCCC as sort of different subject areas at an international, when it comes down to the ground, a farmer is dealing with all of these things and pulling them together. And what we've got is a missing middle at the moment between international conventions, a lot of really ambitious national commitments, and then actually translating that into action on the ground, which requires this cooperation across sectors and scales, which simply isn't happening at the moment. And that does require structural change. And that's what these coalitions should be working towards. Thanks.
Thank you, Fergus. That was a great wrap up. I'm going to hand it over now to Magdalena, please, for your closing thoughts quickly as possible. And then Anne-Laure, you can have a few seconds to wrap it up if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for also this space. I think the governance question, as Fergus was highlighting, is key, right? But I think instead of talking about synergies, I would talk about coordination, and CFS is the space for such coordination and to advance the food systems transformation needed, because actually the CFS has the mandate to fulfill the right to food for all, no? And also, since its reform, it has made it very clear that the voices of those most affected need to be at the center. So really to refocus and to strengthen the current work and the past work that the CFS has been doing, ensuring that the voices of those who practice, move, and transmit knowledge on agroecology are there participating and raising their concerns. So really this coordination is needed, and the CFS has a central role to play in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Magdalena. And Laura, if you could give us a couple of words of guidance, that would be great, because we have closing remarks from two people still that we need to get to. So thank you. Over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Alison. Donc juste très rapidement, pour rebondir aussi sur ce qui a déjà été dit, en effet, la coopération entre tous les secteurs est très importante. En France, tous les ministères sont impliqués dans cette transition agroécologique, aussi bien l'agriculture, la santé, l'environnement. Il y a des liens aussi avec tout ce qui est commercialisation. Au niveau européen, on essaye aussi de pousser ça au niveau de la nouvelle politique agricole commune et son Green Deal dont vous avez entendu parler. Au niveau international, comme ça a été dit par Fergus, en effet, les coalitions qui émergent et ce qu'on va réussir à en faire seront le moyen de développer ces synergies. Et j'appuie très fortement ce que vient de dire Magdalena sur le rôle central du CSA, cette plateforme inclusive, unique, qu'il faut qu'on continue à préserver et qui peut jouer un rôle très important pour que les synergies entre les différents peuples, aux différents niveaux géographiques, entre les secteurs publics et privés, permettent de mettre en œuvre tous ces liens entre l'agroécologie, la biodiversité, le changement climatique, en trouvant des financements adéquats. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous. C'était super. Bon. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. And if you would like to stick around to participate in the word cloud, that would be awesome. We're about to put up a question for the audience so that in 1 to 2 words, what do you think are the synergies or needs for coordination, listening to our panelists, and opportunities that bring together the 3 Rio conventions and the CFS. And while you're engaging in the Mentimeter, I'm going to take a minute to introduce our final 2 speakers. I'm delighted to welcome Madeleine Kaufmann from the Federal Office for Agriculture in Switzerland. Madeleine, I will be able to give you the floor in a minute or 2. And Ruth Richardson will wrap up our session for us. Ruth is from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, and we really look forward to welcoming her comments and insights about what we've all been discussing today. So if the Mentimeter wants to get started, that would be great. I think that there may be a technical issue with the Mentimeter. So maybe what we'll do right now is ask Madeleine oh, here we go, sorry. Awesome. So this happens in real time. This is people putting in their ideas and the words, and it's like a Wordle. So the more people that put in specific ideas, the bigger the word becomes. So it's a growing and dynamic process. So maybe what we'll do is, can we keep that open while we're going to our final two speakers and maybe share this with everybody at the end? Is that possible? I don't know how this works. I apologize.
It sure is, Allison.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. So we're going to flip back now to our speakers and ask Madeleine to take the floor. If possible, Madeleine, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Alison, for giving me the floor, and thank you for the invitation. I'm pleased to be part of this important, timely, and very lively side event and to deliver some closing reflections. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, agriculture and the environment, including biodiversity, are closely interrelated. We have heard it throughout the last hour. And food systems both contribute to and are impacted by climate change, land degradation, and biodiversity loss. And the UN Food Systems Summit that took place 3 weeks ago confirmed the overall recognition by countries against this background of the need to transform our food systems. So food systems are instrumental for change. We are currently negotiating the new Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and I was asked to reflect on what needs to happen with this Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and how Switzerland views the role of agrobiodiversity and agroecology in this framework. For too long, I believe we have taken the approach that biodiversity can simply be protected by creating protection areas. Protection is important, but it is not enough. If we want to achieve the proposed targets of protecting 30% of our planet by 2030 to halt biodiversity loss and the degradation of important ecosystem services in order to move forward towards a nature positive future, we have to go beyond mere protection of biodiversity and includes its sustainable use. So biodiversity for food and agriculture, we have heard it from the panelists today, is the result of the interaction between the environment, genetic resources, species, and management systems. Thus, agrobiodiversity needs to be an integral part of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And in view of Switzerland, it is important that this new framework also includes a measurable target that aims to increase agriculture area under sustainable management practices, because we believe that without taking this sustainably managed area into account, it will be impossible to reach the 30% target. And this is where agroecological approaches come into play and where actions between agroecology and biodiversity are bridging, as highlighted by several of the panelists today. And like many others, and as mentioned, for instance, by Anne-Laure from France, Switzerland is convinced that agroecology is a relevant systemic and holistic approach that fosters resilient and sustainable food systems. And agroecology is one major pathway to link sustainable production with healthy consumption, as also highlighted by Magdalena from the CSM. Agroecology supports, and this is very important for today's side event, I believe, both the sustainable use and the restoration of biodiversity. So now the Coalition on Agroecology, building on the UN Food Systems Summit momentum, in our view, is an important vehicle to accelerate the transformation of food systems as well as to achieve the target of the post-2020 biodiversity framework. We have heard from Mr. Garcia of Mexico, from France, about why they joined the coalition. Switzerland is also a member. I would also like to agree with Fergus Sinclair that said that the coalition is a strong outcome of the summit, but the critical issue now is action. So we need to enhance cooperation and synergies across the interlinked areas between sustainable use and the restoration of biodiversity to achieve the biodiversity goals. Nobody will be able to do it alone, a point that was very rightly highlighted by Miriam today. This need for collaboration, and I think with this I would like to end, is also recognized in the draft FAO Council resolution that will be submitted to its next session end of November, developed by the FAO Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. This resolution calls for stronger engagement of FAO, the Commission, the international treaty, member states, the private sector, to really ensure full consideration of the food and agriculture sector in the negotiation, and then the implementation of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And with that message that, in my opinion, we need also to bring to the tomorrow's CFS Secretariat special event on strengthening the links between the Rio Convention and the CFS, I would like to finish, to thank you for your attention and for this opportunity, and I hope to see many of you tomorrow in the special event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madeleine, for those closing insights and a way forward as well. That's very welcome. And now I'm going to turn over the floor to Ruth Richardson from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food to wrap this up. And then I'll just have a couple of closing comments and share our Mentimeter with you. So over to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Alison. And I've been listening very intently to this fantastic conversation and have been madly scribbling down some themes that I've been hearing. So first, in terms of how agroecology connects to other agendas, and particularly to the 3 Rio conventions, you have answered that already. We just saw the Mentimeter and have heard from all the various speakers how intimately intertwined these various agendas are. Secondly, a theme that I think really came out loud and strong is the need for systemic transformation. So really getting away from the status quo and making sure that any solutions are transformative and that are based on systems. And agroecology is a core solution that is systemic and is transformative. Third point, how? Well, we've heard a long list of ways that we see that agroecology is systemic and transformative. We've heard speakers talk about human rights. We've heard about the access and control of resources. We've heard about a feminist agenda, migration, peace, and prosperity, that it's not just about production, but is about consumption. In all these ways, agroecology touches on the transformative potential. So how do we do this? I have 6 quick points. First of all, we heard we need adequate financing and responsible investment, including from the private sector. This was 13% of the poll. I was surprised at that. I thought it would be a little bit higher, but absolutely necessary to have financing behind this. Secondly, the highest on the poll was enabling policies. So critical. 54%, and a number of folks have talked about what some of those enabling policies might be, whether it's around subsidies or procurement or what have you. Number 3, networks. People have talked about collaboration, the need to work across sectors, the need to collaborate with one another. That was 19% in the poll. Number 4 is evidence. I was very surprised to see that it was so low. It was 10%. Everybody talked about knowledge and evidence and needing to fill implementation gaps. And I'd like to speak to this just a little bit. This is critical to the Global Alliance, and we would like to announce that in November, we will be launching a report called Contested Ground, Understanding the Evidence for Agroecology, Regenerative Agriculture, and Indigenous Foodways. What this report aims to do is elevate evidence on agroecology, regenerative approaches, and Indigenous foodways to shift mindsets as a basis for action and to mobilize approaches for donors, researchers, and policymakers. Why? Well, we believe that transformation requires diverse scientific practices, diverse evidence and knowledge exchange, drawn from Western science, from Indigenous knowledge, and from traditional and experiential knowledge. I will give you a sneak peek of 2 of our key messages. You're the first to hear this. First of all, one of the things that we found was that political power behind dominant narratives marginalizes agroecology, regenerative approaches, indigenous foodways, and influences the way that evidence is considered and legitimizes existing power relationships in the food system. On the flip side, what we found through this research is that the co-creation, exchange, and mobilization of knowledge and evidence creates new entry points to systemic transformation, and it needs to be harnessed to facilitate action across food systems. So I want to let you know that is forthcoming. We believe that the whole issue of knowledge and evidence is central to the power dynamics and the political environment that so many have talked about today. This leads me to the end of my list. Number 5, governance. I'm so pleased that this came up, and we see it centrally in the Mentimeter. I don't think we can underscore the need for participatory rights-based governance. And finally, Alison, I just want to elevate principles. A lot of people talked about the principles that underpin agroecology, also spoke to principles of equity, accountability, ethical conduct, public good. I think this is also central as a way to guide us into the kind of transformative potential that agroecology holds. So thank you so much for all the contributions. Back over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Ruth. And it's very exciting to hear about the compendium coming out in November. We're all will await that anxiously. So thank you for sharing that with us and giving us a bit of a sneak preview, and also for bringing together such a complex side event. We had lots of and that's the nature of what we do. It's hard to pin it down. There's so many different moving parts, and it was great to hear your summary. Thank you. I think, Amanda, if you could put up the Mentimeter now, that would be fantastic. And just as we're looking at this together and noticing that human rights are in the middle, which is glorious and the way it should be. And I'm also glad to see governance, common sense. I think what we do is very grounded, obviously. And I would like to take this opportunity now, as we're wrapping up, to thank everybody, the panelists for giving us their time, and the speakers who wrapped things up for us, but especially our audience for participating and making this such a lively event. I feel hopeful that there's so many people in communities that know how to bring about the change we all need, as well as the planet, to get on track for a genuinely sustainable future. We know that many of the solutions are apparent. We know what to do. We need the space to do it. And now we need to act. And as we all know, time is of the essence. So thank you so much for participating. And again, to our sponsors. And I hope you find the rest of the CFS 49 as engaging as I am. Have a good afternoon or morning or wherever you are. Have a good rest of your day.
Merci beaucoup à tous. Au revoir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.